Hi Paul teachers. Here's a video that I hope is going to help as you're planning your lessons over the next few months. It's hard for us to find time to get together, so I thought this might be a good way to do this. So as you can see, we've had quite a bit of success with the lessons we've been doing, but they are quite long lessons and it can be tricky trying to figure out the best way to use them. So I'm going to give you an example of how I would do a lesson, and I don't know if it will help you, but at least it'll give you some thoughts about how you might be able to do it for yourself. With our PAW class right now, we have quite a wide range of students. We have a lot of what you would call active learners. So if we're sitting and reading through a lesson and then asking questions and then having them write and so on, it becomes very challenging for a lot of our kids to feel interested in the lesson and engaged in the lesson. So we want to be able to give them options through the lesson where they're physically active, where they don't have to deal with the pressure of having to write, because that is actually a big challenge for some of our kids and they get quite anxious about it. But yeah, I mean, we'll talk a little bit about that. We want to remember that this is not school, and so we want to present them with something that's engaging. And our goal is not to follow the lesson as it's written, especially not as in order, but we want to be able to present a lesson that really engages them. Excuse me. Some students can be disruptive when they get distracted or when they get restless. Others can actually just be very quiet. So even when you have students in class who are quiet, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are engaged in what's happening. And I think just really keep an eye on how well they're responding and how well they're connecting with you. And I think that helps you understand a bit more about how some of them are processing what's going on. All right, so let's take a look over here. This is the lesson on Silas. Now, one thing that's really important when we start the lesson is to make sure they understand what we're focusing on. So faith, helping, those kinds of things, words that they understand. And then also let them know that we're going to be learning about Silas. Now here, you'll see they have an activity for when kids arrive. That doesn't necessarily apply to us because our kids are coming in from praise and worship. That would be more for a situation where children are arriving and the teacher wants to keep them busy with some sort of activity. However, the Helper Keys activity is actually a really good one, I think, for the kids that we have. So I would still use that, but I'd use it later in the lesson. We'll get to that in a little while. Memory work, 12 minutes, that's a huge amount of time. So we can find better ways to do that. The memory verse is important, and we want to use that several different times during the lesson. So we'll get to that. I would start with the introduction. Down here with the introduction, we have 1 Peter 5 and Acts 15. Rather than taking the 3 to 5 minutes reading those, I would much rather just tell them. In 1 Peter 5, they talk about Silas as being a helper. In Acts 15, they talk about how he was faithful, how he was a leader, he was a sacrificer, and he was a risk taker. And the reason that Silas was sent is because there were people who were unsure about things about their faith, and he was there to really help them out. So that would be my opening. I would skip the discussion questions there because that's going to take a lot of time, and I'd much rather for them to be able to focus as I'm going through the main scripture and discussion questions. So we go through Acts 16, and then I would choose maybe 5 or 6 questions from that list. We don't need to go through all of them, but go through the ones that you think are most important based on how the kids are responding. Now, there's another thing here, and that is after the introduction about Silas, I would like to do this activity down here, the application activity. And this is where you have a rope and somebody is holding the rope and somebody else is pulling. We don't even have to mention the idea of it representing sin. It's just the idea of how people help each other. And so one person pulls and the teacher is pulling the rope and sliding them along, and then others jump in to help and so on. And it's a good way to introduce the idea of helping. Then we get into our main lesson, Acts 16, get into our discussion questions. Now, EMS oftentimes will show a video at this point, and the video will have something to do with Silas or to do with the theme, Videos are great, but if you can't find one that's relevant, then I wouldn't worry about it, but it's a good opportunity. Now the rope activity got them up and got them physical, but it wasn't a wild, crazy sort of thing. So it's good. You don't want to do an activity like later we'll talk about the balloon activity. You wouldn't want to do that just before you're actually teaching the main part of the lesson. You want something that's going to keep them physically interested, but not getting crazy. So we've selected some questions after reading Acts 16. We've talked about who Silas was and why he was trusted. And then from there, I would like to use the helper keys activity, which is the one that was up here at the top. With the helper keys activity, it talks about using keys to identify things that would help others believe in the Lord. Right? So you can have them drawing, you can have them writing. I always give a choice because if they don't want to write, that's totally fine. They can draw instead. But I don't say, if you can't write, then draw, because then it automatically sets them up for the mindset that they're not capable of doing something. And for some of them, that's going to affect the way the rest of the lesson goes. But they're thinking about things, they're drawing, they're possibly writing, and that's a good activity for them to do. So we've done that, and then after that one, it would be a good idea to go into the balloon activity. So the balloon activity is basically where you are preparing little pieces of paper inside balloons. Now originally they are sentence fragments. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different sentence fragments. But you could do it as sentence fragments, or you could do it with individual words that just talk about helping. So it's up to you, but this is definitely a physical activity that's going to get them up, get them a little bit energetic, a little bit wild and crazy. So you want to do that toward the end after you've gone through all the important content. And it's a good way to get them doing things, right? Some of them really need that chance to get rid of that physical energy. And then the final activity that I would do is the crossword puzzle, which is the Silas is a helper puzzle. It doesn't really require a lot of thought, some thought, but for those that are ready to shut down at that point, that's okay. It's not going to be a problem. Those who want to do it, that's great as well. It gives them the option to do so. But one thing that's important is throughout the lesson bringing out that memory verse. And at some point, that's definitely something that I want them to be able to write. So if I'm going to have them write anything at all during the lesson, it's the memory verse, because writing the verse does help with the memorization process. That could be on the back of one of the papers that they've already been working on. Another option is to have the take-home page. And actually, I was thinking maybe just copying all of the take-home pages and having them available in the materials boxes. So if anybody wants to hand them out, they can. But that's the way that I would approach this lesson. Most likely that's going to take us right through until the end. Some will get the crossword done and some won't. But at least it's given them an opportunity to be up and off on their feet, to get out of their seats, but also they've been able to do some work where they're all focused at the seats at the tables. So I hope this is helpful. We all have different ways of doing things, and that's what's so great about it. But the important thing is that we're understanding how the kids learn best and making sure that the message really comes across to them from week to week. Thank you all very much. Be blessed. Have a great week.